It is very important for us to read very carefully chapter 1 of Genesis, the priestly story of creation, because it is the first picture we encounter when reading the Bible. A picture that will be fundamental to understanding the messages of all the people who have participated in writing the Bible. Namely, how the world looks like in the eyes of God and the people that He addresses. So in the next 20 minutes, I'll try to paint you a picture of how the world looks like in the eyes of the ancient people, those who wrote and those who were addressed in the writing of the people who wrote the biblical texts. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the first thing you need to pay attention to is that heavens is plural, but the earth is singular. The world we live in is one flat reality that we hardly know. We think we know it, but in 21st century, we have had a few hundred years of science. We understand that we know very little. And so far, we have been just scratching the surface of our plain, flat reality. Now, if the Bible talks about heavens, it talks about multiplicity of angelic realms, which are very complex and very complicated, and you know what? We know nothing about it. There are many rooms in my Father's house. This is New Testament. And it's a confirmation of the fact that in the beginning, God creates the heavenly world as something very complex and very complicated, multi-layered, and one flat earth that swims in water. So, in the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth. And the heavens corresponds with the invisible or immaterial dimension of the created world. So there is invisible and immaterial dimension of the created world. It is also created, right? And although we say that it's spirit and it's spiritual, it's quite different than the way God is spirit and spiritual. Why? Because God is uncreated spirit. Uncreated invisibility. Whether the angels and the angelic realms, they're created spirits and they're created invisibility. Okay? But when we talk about the earth, we talk about everything that is visible. This is the world of the physical nature. Right? The material world. Something that is objective and has substance that can be touched, seen, felt. Right? With our physical senses. Probably as students in the Bible school, you're familiar with the greatest creed of the church, which is called Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed of Faith, which was written in 381. Actually, first it was written in Nicaea 325, and later on expanded in Constantinople in 381. If you don't know about this, just write it down and find it. This is the backbone of Christian faith. This is the creed that all three traditions, Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant, agree about. Right? This is the definition of faith. And in this definition of faith, we proclaim that we believe in God the Father, the Almighty God the Father, who is the creator of the heavens and the earth, of everything that is visible and invisible. And with that we confirm that when we say invisible, we mean the heavens, and when we say visible, we affirm the earth, right? Now, this is plain, this is simple, like beans and rice, right? Okay. But now, the Bible says that the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Waters. in almost every religion, pagan, ancient religion, there were certain basic ideas of what is the primal element from which the world is being created. And many of the ancient religions would say that it was fire. In Jewish religion, the primal element is water. Everything comes out of the water. But now, why water and why the Spirit hovering over the water? The Spirit hovers over the water. This water is like a womb. And we know that every human life is conceived and develops into a watery sac that we call womb. Right? So this water that we see in the beginning, that there's only water and darkness, corresponds to the dark cosmic womb that was there in the beginning, from which our worlds will be born, especially the earth. Then God creates the light, which is very simple for us. There is light, and we know light and darkness, day and night. But then in the second verse comes the difficulty, and with this difficulty we have a lot of misunderstandings. Now let's find the text. Verse 6. I'm reading the NIV, the nearly inspired version of the Bible. New International. It's very unprecise translation, but it's easy for me to read because English is not my mother language. Verse 6, it says, and God said, let there be an expanse. In other translations says, let there be a firmament. Yeah. Right? Between the waters, to separate water from water. So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so. And God called the expanse sky, or in other translations, heaven. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. So, does anyone have a clue what this verse talks about? What is this expanse? What is this water above and water below? What is this separation of water from water? Did anybody ever tell you that? And yet, if you miss to understand this text here, this is the beginning, the entry into the biblical revelation, you'll misunderstand a great deal of what this Bible says. Let me tell you what it is. In the beginning, there's only water, right? Waters. And God says, I don't want waters everywhere. I want something in between the waters. And that's why I will put some waters up and let some waters stay down. Okay? So, there's some waters that God left up, and some waters stayed down. And He divided the waters by creating something that the Bible calls firmament or an expanse. And this is this. God created something that is called firmament, or later on sky or heavens. And the Hebrew word is rakia. Rakia is sky, and confusingly translated heaven. Heaven, right? But then, what are the waters below? Well, we read it in the next text. The next verse, it says, and God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear. And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered water he called seas. And God saw that it was good. So, what happens here is this. The water that is down is called sea. So here we have water from this initial bubble that stays down, and on top of this water comes the dry land. Out of it, as a child whose head comes out of the womb, right? So the story of creation is the story of the birth of our world, actually. A birth out of waters. So, part of the earth, part of the earth, what am I doing? I'm confusing the pens. Part of the earth is above the waters, and the other part is under the waters. It's like the earth is a swimming disk, right? And basically, the waters above are this watery firmament. The waters below is the sea. And now in Psalm 104, we have read about this already. The story explains the following. Give me a few minutes and I will finish. Psalm 104. The second part of verse 2 says, He stretches out rakia like a tent. So basically, according to this text particularly, rakia, which is sky, or here is called heaven, is a curtain. But this curtain is not any kind of curtain, it is watery curtain. Watery curtain. And you know, basically, this curtain divides the upper world from the lower world, the angelic divine world from the world of humans, right? Now, you can imagine where the rain comes from. It comes from here. So, the ancient world, or the ancient understanding of how the world works, was based on observation. So people observed that water comes from above, so there must be something out there that provides water. And what is it? Well, it's a layer that divides the upper world of God and the angels from the lower world of humans and animals. And whenever God wants, He allows rain to fall down. And now, think about this description. The other story of creation that I told you about. Verse 5, for example, says, He set the earth on its foundations, and it can never be moved. And now, you covered it with the deep as with a garment. In other words, this is the water that surrounds the disk of the earth, right? Like with a garment. It's wrapped up. Like a baby that is put in the cloths of the mother provided, right? A birth and then clothing. And then listen what it says here. Verse 7. But at your rebuke, the waters fled. At the sound of your thunder, they took flight, or they took to flight. They float They flew over the mountains, and they went down into the valleys in the place you assigned for them. Now, according to that text, God rebukes the waters, and what He does is dividing them. Some of the waters get over the mountains. This is the waters above, from where the rain comes. Others stayed down. They became sea and rivers in the mountains. Right? So God rebukes them, and they're split. Now, this is very interesting. Actually, I will continue with this tomorrow, because there are quite a lot of details, and I want you to get into this. But now, the Jewish rabbis say that at the beginning of creation, all the waters that were there were one. But when they were divided, they became male and female. Male and female. Okay? Think about this. The whole world is polarized. The whole reality is male and female. And usually what is male is what comes from above. And what is female is what is waiting down to receive what comes from above. That's why the heaven generally is a male principle in the cosmos. But the earth is the female principle. Why? Because heaven seems to be more active than the earth. And if heaven doesn't send its water, its rain, the earth cannot produce. Just as if a male does not fertilize the female cannot conceive. Just as if the sower doesn't throw a seed in the ground cannot produce fruits. Right? This is very pictorial, very descriptive way of understanding reality, but it's the Bible, right? So, think about this, and I will demonstrate you that a little later on. Imagine the great power that God has to exercise to keep those waters up. Because in the mind of these people, the staying of the waters above is divine, an exercise of divine authority over the waters. Now, if you take this bottle and you hold it for 15 minutes, you will feel that you're growing weak. Why? Because the natural, how shall I say? The natural way of thing is that the water wants to drop down. So the natural behavior of those waters is that they unite with the other waters that are down. And God has to exercise an immense power to keep them up. And at one point He decided, okay, I've had enough with you humans. So I'm letting the upper waters down. And do you know what happened? Flood. The world was destroyed. The world became water. So God undid what He did in the beginning. And if you carefully read the text, it says that the seals of the springs were opened, and then the windows above as well. And so water came from down and above and created the flood. And the flood is the undoing of creation. It is the reverse process by which everything becomes water, in which waters above and waters down unite as they were in the beginning. So this whole concept of water is very important for the Jews, because according to their faith, or in accordance with their faith, God will provide yearly rains that will be sufficient for all the plantation, not only in Israel, but over the whole face of the earth. And they believed that by what they were doing in the temple and the way they were obeying God would determine whether it will be a dry year or a year of floods. Because one of the natural ways that God would punish humanity is by either depriving them of rain or sending them too much rain that would flood everything. And you read this very carefully, it comes very often in the law, in the book of Deuteronomy, where it says that if you obey the voice of God, the commandments of God, if you follow God faithfully, He will send you the early and the late rain. Because human beings are entirely dependent on it. And since God has a total control over the waters above, He determines how much rain there will be. Now, all the religions of the world have tried to please God for rain. Because their life depended on it. And they did all kinds of sacrifices and all kinds of tricks to provide sufficient rain. And when they experience floods, they believe that God or the gods are angry with them. That was a common worldview that is presented as well in the Bible.